The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.
Welcome to the Tim Heale Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to have a chat with Jim. Jim's going to tell us all about his life. So, Jim, if you could tell me when and where you were born, and if you could describe what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received. So, you're in the room, Jim. Welcome.
Thank you, Tim. Well, I was born in New York City at a time when New York City was the greatest place on earth. In the post-war era, the United States had unparalleled superiority, really in everything, because of the destruction wreaked upon almost all the other countries. None of which hit the United States. So it was a very good time to be an American. I went mostly to private schools, and I was a born polymath. I have no memory of a time when I wasn't intensely interested in learning any legitimate subject, meaning anything that is taught in a university is of interest to me, and I want to know. So it's really, for me, a bottomless well. And so I was a very enthusiastic scholar. At the age of 10, I was shocked to find out that some kids didn't like school.
Blimey.
I couldn't believe that. That
might have been
so
me then.
I did very well in school.
That could have well been me. I was actually put off school at a very early age.
Right.
It all came about because there was a bully, and I think I was around about six, and this bully, he started to pick on me, and I asked my old man, what should I do about it? And he said, well, son, the best thing to do is give him a thump and make it a good one, because if you don't, he's going to give you a right hiding. So the next thing that happened is I went back to school the following day. All anybody saw was me thumping and him going into the pool or into the pond. I was dragged off to the headmaster's office and I got 6 of the best. And the injustice I felt over that little incident put me off school for the rest of my days, really. So, yeah, it wasn't a great start, but it was later found out that I suffer from a bit of dyslexia, so that wasn't helping either. But I've never stopped learning ever since, but not in school. I went to the School of Hard Knocks. So, whereabouts in New York did you live?
Well, I was born and grew up in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a vast place. It was forced to become a part of New York City by New York State against the will of the people of Brooklyn. Brooklyn has 4 million people. So it's a sizable city on its own, and it was sort of dragged into New York City around 1900. But most people, I know many people who grew up in Brooklyn at that time, absolutely loved it. The culture, it was the closest thing to ideal I've ever seen as far as how people got along and all the cultural advantages we had. So I kind of stood out in general, but specifically from my family, because of my scholarship, my enthusiasm for learning, which most people really don't understand. To me, the most important thing is knowledge. Knowledge is the value itself. In other words, I wasn't learning so I could make more money or so I could impress somebody or anything like that. I was learning because I wanted to know. And all of this eventually led me to discovering Septemics, which is a subject that's Septemics. and discovering the subject. First, I had to discover the phenomena. Then I had to craft it into an applied philosophical system, and then I had to express it in a book, which I published called Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena.
Well, before we go on to that,
So
you've missed out an awful lot there. You've gone from well, you haven't even started school, and then you've written this book. So let's take you right back to growing up in Brooklyn. What was your elementary school like?
So, well, as I said, I went to private schools. I got very high grades, and I was sort of the type of kid that adults liked. I was an altar boy for 4 years. Then I was a cadet for 4 years. Then I attended college on academic scholarship for 4 years. So, you know, I was sort of like older people really liked me. Other kids, I think some of the kids just didn't understand me, and some of them resented me. Because in addition to being a scholar, I was also an athlete and a musician. So, you know, Mark Twain famously said, "There's nothing more annoying than a good example." Yeah. So I made a lot of enemies just by doing the right thing.
So you was an altar boy. What did that? Was you in the choir as well? Were you singing in the choir?
No, we didn't have a choir. We had an organist, and I would attend church on Sunday with the entire school because it was a Catholic school, and we would all sing together. So it was about 1,000 voices singing in unison these various hymns, which I came to know very well, and they changed seasonally. There are Christmas hymns, there are Easter hymns, and so forth. But as an altar boy, once I became an altar boy, I was on the altar with the priest, serving mass. So,
so you was like the lad walking along with the tray of bread, or holding the bottle of wine. Was that the job?
Yes. I mean, if the mass hasn't changed too much since then. I mean, it used to be in Latin, and now it's in the language of the population, wherever that is. But yeah, I mean, it was always in my mind that I would be an altar boy. The first time anybody asked me, "What are you going to be when you grow up?" I was 4 years old, and I said, "A priest."
Clearly didn't get that part in.
And I considered being a priest, and really, I studied with the Jesuits for 4 years, who are a very famous and, in some circles, controversial sect. The Jesuits are the intellectuals of the Catholic Church. There are many people who try to become Jesuits and are rejected. So it's sort of like the Ivy League, you know, it's like hard to get in. And the standards are very, very high for the Jesuits. And they had a tremendous impact on me when I was a teenager, and in many ways formed my character to make me a non-materialistic person, an intellectual, and a serious scholar, all of which they are.
Yeah. So let's just look briefly back at your time as an altar boy. So if you've got 1,000 kids all singing on a Sunday mass, do they all come through communion, and do they get a sip of the wine, or do they sort of water it down for them? How do they do the communion?
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Could you turn up the mic or speak up or something?
Yeah,
I didn't quite hear what you asked
me. A bit more volume. So as an altar boy, you've got about 1,000 students all in there singing on a Sunday morning. So what happens with the communion? Does all the kids sort of line up to take the bread and wine,
Yeah, well,
or is it watered down for them?
Have you never been? Have you
No,
never been to mass?
no. I'm Church of England, so we don't really go to church. I'm a hatcham, matcham, dispatcham type. So it just goes for christenings, weddings, and funerals.
Okay. Well, the altar boys were at the hand of the priest, who were at the right there helping the priest get through the mass, his assistants, which included serving communion and everything else. I mean, I was skilled in all the skills of an altar boy, including weddings and funerals and everything else. And it was the beginning of my study of Latin, which continued in prep school for 4 years. And I was a very serious Latin scholar, which made a big difference in my life. Because reading classical literature in the original language is a very educational thing. Anything that you read in translation is never the same. I've read a lot of literature in translation, as have many scholars. But I knew Latin well enough that I could read it in the original. And I read the same passages, both in Latin and both in English, and saw there was a big difference. It doesn't translate well into English. I mean, I was adept at translating it correctly, but it's not the same thing. And I'm sure that's true for every language.
Yeah, I was when I was in Afghanistan. We had a problem with translating English into Pashto, and it just doesn't work properly. So I came up with a ruse. I was writing radio scripts for a product we call the Afghan Archers, which is a sort of serialised program of local life. So what I would do is I got one of my interpreters who was my script writer. So I asked him to write the scripts in Pashto and then translate it into English. And the first time we did this, when you read the English, it didn't make a huge amount of sense. You kind of got the gist of what was going on, but in English, it's like gobbledygook. So I put the script in for approval, put it into the approval process. It came back red marked all over it. So the next thing I get called up to the commander's office to explain myself what I was doing with this gobbledygook. So when I explained to him exactly why we'd done it the way we'd done it, it's not for our audience. We were just asking him to approve the basic story. But when it was written in Pashto and read out in Pashto, it made perfect sense. So he kind of got that. So from then on, our scripts were fine. They passed, although they just didn't read right in English. They made sense in Pashto. So that was my experience of translation, shall we say? And that was fascinating to do at the time. So I guess it's the same trying to. If you was to put English into Latin, you'd probably have the same dramas because it wouldn't read right, and vice versa. When it comes from Latin back to English, it doesn't always make a lot of sense when you read it back.
Well, it makes sense. That's not really the issue. The issue is that it loses its beauty.
Yeah.
For instance, I read the Aeneid, which is a 12-book poem by a genius known colloquially as Virgil. Gaius Virgilius Maro was his full name. And he wrote this at the behest of Caesar Augustus. And I read that, and of course it has great beauty in Latin that you don't get in English. And I'm sure that's true of all poetry. I don't think there's much success. I mean, for example, I think Spanish and Italian are so similar that in a case like that, I don't think you would have a big problem, because in many cases the word is the same or almost the same. But if you try to translate English to Chinese, it's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, I've known many Chinese people, highly intelligent people, who, you really kind of had to struggle to communicate with them. So, but English is not an easy language to begin
No,
with.
not
But it's
English.
it's one that I
That's over here, because we use slightly different words to mean the same thing,
Right.
but spelt totally not as you say them. So, for instance, there and there. So their books, or over there. It's the same word spelt different way. So I kind of get it.
Right.
So moving on from being an altar boy then, and going for 1,000 kids all wanting a piece of bread and a sip of wine, you moved on then to your elementary school, which was this military academy. Was that it? Your Jesuit school.
I was an altar boy in elementary school, which is the norm. And then I went to a Jesuit military school and became a cadet. So we were taught by the Jesuits, but also by instructors from the United States Army. So it was a level of discipline that most people would not be able to take. Most people would run out of that school screaming. I loved every minute of it, because I had the highest regard for my instructors, not only the Jesuits, but the lay teachers and the military people. I had high respect for them. And it was a school that was hard to get into. You had to take several batteries of tests to be allowed to attend this school. So it was kind of an honor to be permitted to attend. And so everybody in the school knew that the students, there was a select student body. And so therefore there was a lot of mutual admiration, because I was in there with 1,000 other kids who were just like me, serious students who didn't cause any trouble.
So what was the military side of it like? What sort of things did you learn from the military side of the school?
It was United States Reserve Officer Training Corps, popularly we called ROTC. And we had a professor of military science who was always a major, who ran the program. And then we had sergeants who were our instructors, who were enlisted men in the U.S. Army, but had been in for a while. So they were middle-aged men. And they all had specialties. For example, we had one guy who was a weapons specialist. So he taught us about weapons, how to use them, how to fire them, how to take them apart, and everything else. He was a highly decorated marksman, which again is something I held in high regard. His skill in firing weapons was superhuman. So our professor of military science was a Green Beret, which was now they're called Special Forces, that and other groups. And he was a highly decorated officer. His chest was completely covered with medals and ribbons. And he was just a wonderful person. A very, very agreeable person, easy to talk to, easy to learn from. And most of the people in that school were like that. They knew that the students were not going to give them any trouble, and so there was a rapport.
And what about on the academic side? I mean, was it like a boarding school?
Well,
or
no, it was not a boarding school. Actually, I did consider going to a boarding school, but I decided in the end to not do that, and because I came from a very good home, a very nice house, perfectly kept. There was no reason for me to not want to be in my home. So I had to go to school every day, which is the norm. But when I was there, I mean, that school was my life. I wanted to be there. I loved it. I couldn't get there early enough, and I would stay until they kicked me out. So that was not unusual. I mean,
so
it
is this
was
in
something.
still?
It's in New York City. The school still exists, but it's changed a lot because New York has changed a lot.
Yeah.
The demographics of New York is dramatically different from what it was in those days. Culturally, it's a completely different place. Everybody in my family has left New York. There's nobody left.
Okay. So how long
So
were
I
you at
had,
school for?
what we call, it was 4 years, and I had what was called a classical education. So the military was training us to be military officers, although there was no obligation to go into the military after the school. And the academic side of it, they were training us to be basically to be intellectuals or to be professionals. So I went into engineering. So most of the kids from that school, they became doctors, lawyers, engineers, military officers, something like that.
So they're all high achievers, even at that
Yes,
stage.
if you weren't a high achiever, you didn't get in.
Yeah.
The school would give a test, and they would invite, I think, about 1,000 students, because the school was filled for that test. And then they would take the 240 highest results, and that's who got in. 250. And
So
that's who
it's-
they allowed in. So it was hard to
And
get
that's-
in, and
that's
once you
each
got
year,
in,
is
you
it?
wanted to stay.
Yeah.
Pardon?
That's each year, 250 students a year into the college.
Yeah, that's what they admitted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you do at the end of that when you graduated?
Well, then I went to college. I had a scholarship to college, and I went into engineering school.
Okay.
And it was a very, very interesting experience being in. We had our own building. The engineering school had its own building. So there's 2,000 engineering students who all were, because it was not an easy school to get into, we were all enthused about engineering. And nearly all of the teachers were engineers too. So it was a heavy engineering culture. And I don't know how much you know about engineers, but there's a distinct culture among engineers. They think a certain way, they behave a certain way, and you're trained to be a certain way. And that,
So
if I didn't have that discipline, I never would have been able to create Septemics, because it's essentially what I did is I discovered hitherto unknown phenomena, and then I engineered it into a system.
So what sort of engineering did you study when you got there? What was the engineering that you studied? What was the engineering that you studied?
Well, you know, I
civil engineering,
basically
mechanical.
every engineering student starts out in exactly the same curriculum, and it's general. It's only later on that you specialize. So by then, I knew that I was an engineer, but that I did not want to engineer electrons or airfoils or gears or motors. I wanted to engineer the human psyche. And this is something that goes back to earliest childhood for me. I was always interested in the twilight zone, the outer limits, one step beyond, the things that were not covered anywhere in mainstream education. I insisted on knowing that.
Mm.
So I wound up going out of the engineering curriculum. And for many years, I didn't even have a major. I just studied, I followed my polymathic instincts, which is to try to learn everything. So I had a very broad education, and I graduated with a Bachelor of Science. And by that time, I had accomplished a couple of things. One is that I knew what the mainstream had to offer. Another thing was that I knew very well how to study, meaning how to learn. And as I said, I knew that I wanted to engineer the human psyche. So I then started studying alternative subjects, what today we would call alternative subjects. And I studied a variety of different alternative subjects because they were out of the mainstream, and I wanted to learn what is with these people? What have they got? What is this about? And I studied many different subjects, and eventually I became a human development engineer, and I worked professionally for many decades helping people to become smarter, wiser, more ethical, and so forth. And while I was doing that, after a while, I started observing that there were scales in play, meaning my clients would improve in a predictable way. Now, I never told anybody that, but I wrote them down. So by about the mid-90s, I had all of these scales of different lengths, and I knew they were correct because they were empirical. In other words, they presented themselves to me. So after a while, I would know what result the client was going to have before he had it, although I didn't say that to anybody. And of course, this only made me better at what I was doing because I knew where we were going. Now, there's one scale in particular that I had that I knew absolutely was correct so far as it went, as far as describing people. In 1995, this scale had 6 levels. In 1995, I discovered a 7th level for that scale. When I inserted that 7th level into the 6-person scale, it clicked in mathematically, and a whole array of functions presented themselves. And I realized that I was into something big, something beyond what I was looking for. And when I saw that this scale manifested mathematically, I saw that it was natural law. So then I thought, I wonder how many of these other scales that I have are actually 7-level scales, because only 2 of the scales that I had 7 levels. They all had different levels. So I started inspecting the other scales, and because I knew what I was looking for, it was easy for me to find the missing levels. And in a couple of months, I had about 32 7-level scales. Now, when I found them as 7-level scales, they all manifested mathematically. They all had characteristics which made them indisputable, in the same way that the Pythagorean theorem is indisputable. The Pythagorean theorem existed before Earth existed, and it will still be true after Earth no longer exists. Now, Pythagoras, a great genius, it has his name connected with it, but it's inherent to the universe. There's no possible doubt that the Pythagorean theorem is correct. In fact, it's deeply embedded in math, so much so that it comes up everywhere in all kinds of scientific applications. And these scales are of that level of knowledge. Now, the first transcript of this work was written in 1995, and I started passing it around to colleagues of mine, very brilliant people who all had graduate degrees. And to my surprise, they were blown away by it. And nobody had a lukewarm response. So then I realized, okay, I've got something big here. So then I started giving it to my clients and friends, and every single person who has ever read this book was blown away. Now, when I say blown away, that's what they tell me. That is the term that they give me. I don't usually speak like that, but that is what they say. So I realized I was into something big. I researched it for 25 years. I rewrote it, and there was a lot to figure out because I had the scales themselves, but I had to determine what is the axis that we're measuring here. Now, eventually I had 35 scales, and that's what's in the book that I published a little more than a year ago. So really, this is the culmination of my whole life. The main problem with this book is getting people to read it because, number one, most people don't read books. Of the people who do read books, most of them read fiction books. Of the people who read nonfiction books, most of them are in a slot, meaning psychologists read psychology books, mathematicians read mathematics books, historians read history books. That is how our education system works. And that is why I don't have a graduate degree, because I studied all of these alternative subjects for many years, none of which ever gave a normal college degree. I mean, they have their own degrees, but I did not want to be specialized. I did not want to. I mean, I could have gotten a graduate degree in any one of 50 subjects, but I didn't want that. I wanted what I eventually discovered in this subject of mine, Septemics. In fact, I didn't even have the word Septemics until right before I published the book, because I had to give it a name. The word Septemics means of or pertaining to seven, because Septemics comprises a collection of 35 scales, each of which has 7 levels. So the response that I saw during those 25 years was universally positive. There were no negative responses. So my calling was to prove this, to make it foolproof. That is what engineers do. An engineer has to get results. When I was working as human development engineer, I got results. And that is why people liked working with me. And so I spent a lot of time not only verifying the subject, but expressing it in a way that normal people would understand. It would have been very easy for me to write an academic book. I didn't want to do that. I wanted this book to be applicable to anyone who can read English and wants to improve himself. Now, you might think, well, everyone wants to improve himself, and I'm sorry, that's not true. There are people who don't want to improve themselves. They are a minority, but they do exist. But this book, go ahead.
So can you explain to me what, say, take one of the 7 levels are, and how it works with a person? So what are you actually looking at? What are you trying to determine at the end of it?
Well,
how is it going to help somebody?
Basically, let me put it this way. I wrote this book to help people. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, activity moves persons or groups up these scales, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. More importantly, just finding out what level you, another person, or some group is at is by itself enlightening and beneficial. And finally, once you know the actual level of a person or group, you can improve that person or group by moving him up one level at a time. That is one of the axioms of Septemics. You can never skip a level. Now, there are occasions when it might seem that you skipped a level, and all that means is you went through quickly or easily and didn't notice it. But generally speaking, you are aware that you changed level because it's quite distinct. All of these advantages represent major steps forward for society. Each of these scales is an axis against which to evaluate human behavior. Combined, they empower one to understand, predict, and manage human affairs to a degree hitherto unattainable by most.
So how would a sort of a layman employ moving up one of these scales?
Well, basically, you have to study the book because each one of these scales is similar in a sense to the periodic table of chemistry. Before Mendeleev created the periodic table, there was a subject of chemistry, but he revolutionized it by taking all the elements and putting them on one page in proper relation to one another. And that dramatically improved the understanding of chemistry and the teaching of chemistry, the learning of chemistry. Each one of these scales is like that. Each scale is expressed in what you might call a table or a spreadsheet or a matrix. And when you look at it, you can see how the data correlate. And so most people have an epiphany just looking at any one of these scales. Now, the
So it's a
text,
bit like is it a bit like sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Is that the sort of
yes,
thing you're looking at?
yes,
So
except,
somebody's absolute basic needs is food and water, and
yes,
then when they get
except you
food and
see,
water, then they want shelter, and then moving up the scale, and
right,
when they
right,
get to
it's
the side of
similar.
the top, they never get to it.
It's similar. The difference is I know in the deepest sense that these scales are correct. Now, you can quibble with the names I gave to them or the way I explicated them because there's some art involved in expressing something. But the scales themselves, I know are correct. The same way I know that two sides of an isosceles triangle are equal. That has always been true, and it will always be true. These scales are universally applicable, meaning there's no human being who's going to have a situation that comes up that does not respond to one or more of these scales. So you have a situation, and you find the scale that's relevant. Usually there's more than one scale that's relevant to a situation. And you study the scale. And you can place yourself at a specific level, which tells you exactly where you are. And then it helps you because you can improve yourself by moving up one level. So you know what you're going for. This solves one of the most pernicious problems that has plagued mankind, which is the gradient problem. Meaning, most people will have a situation or problem, but they don't really know how to solve it. This book tells you how to resolve it. Because let's say there's a scale of allegiance. That's an extremely important scale. It determines everything about relationships. And an allegiance can decay. When allegiance decays, the relationship decays. So you can find where you or another person is on this scale, and then you can move yourself or another person up one level. And then when you're up one level, then you can move up another level. Many of these scales have the capability of, you could just take that one scale and change your whole life just by that one scale. For example, there's a scale of choice. Everyone talks about freedom. Freedom, it's the biggest subject. Well, freedom is the ability to choose. And the scale of choice tells you how free you are. And this is really an eye-opener because it explains so much about how people behave and what they do and why they do it. So when you find what level you're at, vis-a-vis some specific context, you can improve it. So your power of choice will improve somewhat. And then when you're at the higher level, you can then again improve it. And by doing this, you can use this book to sort of jack yourself up little by little in all the different areas of your life. So it really does not matter whether you're concerned about romance or finance or physical fitness or relationships or friendships or anything. It all is subject to these scales. So this is basically an introductory text on the subject of septemics. It is a new subject, and that is the main problem that I have. People who actually read the book are blown away, blown away. I've been seeing this for 25 years. Of course, people who don't read books, it's not going to help them because they didn't read the book. So, it's like anything else. You have to do it. It's like a person, there are people who will go for acupuncture once and say it doesn't work. They're missing the whole point. I've had about 1,100 acupuncture treatments. It works. And the reason I keep going is it works. There's no risk, there's no downside, and it handles anything that's physically wrong with you, it ameliorates it with no detriment and no risk and no harm. So a person who goes once, I say, well, going once doesn't accomplish anything. You have to continue to go. So this book is the same way. It's like you have to study the book. There are 35 skills, and if you take advantage of them, I can absolutely guarantee your life will improve.
So where can people get your book?
Well, it's very easy to find. If you put the word Septemics into a search engine, you will get a flood of responses. It's on all the main places, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. You can get it from the publisher, Author House. But I recommend you go to my website, septemics.com, because there is a massive amount of information. It tells you what readers have said about it, what people have written about it. It has reviews, even sections of the book are there. So you can find out about me and about the book at the website, and then you can determine if this is something that you want to go into. But I can tell you, it's in hardbound, softbound, and ebook. The ebook is inexpensive. In general, ebooks are inexpensive. So for the few dollars that you spend on this ebook, you can change your whole life. If you study the skills and work through them, you can improve yourself on all 35 of those skills.
Is there an audio book as well?
No, and there will not be an audio book because, as I said, you have to look at the scale in the same way that you look at the periodic table. Now, you could talk about the periodic table, but you're really defeating your purpose. The best thing is that you should just give the guy the periodic table. Now, of course, he has to know what the symbols mean. What does He mean? He has to know that He means helium. Okay? But if you're a chemistry student, you know that. So I have glossaries at the head of every chapter, and even in front of the introduction. The introduction itself has a glossary. So I am undercutting the semantic barriers to make it easy for people to understand. For example, if you look up the word communication, it has about 35 definitions. There is a scale of communication. That one scale, if you just use that one chapter, it will completely revolutionize your life. Because when your communication skills improve, everything else improves. Your ability as a salesman, your ability to develop relationships, everything improves relative to human beings when your communication skill improves. So I give a specific definition of communication. There's no ambiguity. You're not going to say, I wonder what definition he's using, because I give it. And so I give the definition of every name of every scale. And you have to realize there are 35 scales and 7 levels of each scale. That's 245 different levels. Every one of them had to be verified and expressed. And then the scales themselves had to be studied to determine what axis is this? Because as I said, I had the scales before I had the axes. So for example, there's a scale of magnanimity. Magnanimity is an important virtue. Originally, I thought there was the scale of maturity. But then I realized, no, there's something under that. Because when you look at a person's, when you say, well, he's immature, you're sort of saying his magnanimity is limited. Because as a person matures, he becomes more magnanimous. So that's a good example of a scale that I discovered the axis many years after I discovered the scale. And then it really made sense, because when you look at what axis this is, and then you see the 7 components of it, it really opens up your mind to what is going on with people.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. So this book is available everywhere you can find it. So, and have
Yes.
you finished it, or you're still moving on? You're still looking for more answers?
Well, the short answer is yes, because that's how I am. I mean, the search engine to me is the greatest thing going. Because I always am wondering about things, like might want to know, like, well, what church did E.M. Forster belong to? And I can find out. So that's a great thing for me. So I use search engines all the time, just for my own illumination. But I'm really overwhelmed now with doing interviews. That's basically what I'm doing now. I mean, I've been promoting the book since it came out. Right now, I'm in the interview stage. I'm doing interviews. Today, I have 2. So I do, typically at least 1 every day, as many as 3 a day. So I'm getting the word out because I want to help people. I've jumped from helping people by the hundreds to helping people by the millions. There are 1.5 million people who can read English. Of them, probably about half of them would read a book. So that's a lot of people who I could help with this book. And that is what I intend to do. And the other thing I want to point out is I already know from experience and observation that anyone who masters this book will have an impact on society. And the reason for that is he wouldn't only use it to illuminate himself. He would necessarily use it for others. A guy would read this and he would want his spouse to read it, or he would help his spouse. Let's say his spouse had a big problem, business problem. You could turn to the scale of management, or the scale of allegiance, or the scale of human ability, and help the spouse unravel what's going on with that business and resolve the problem. So people who read this book use it, because it's like, if I gave you a 25-pound turkey, you would not eat the whole thing, right? You would share some of it with your friends and relatives, right? So that's what this book is like. It has a massive amount of data, and everybody who reads it has that result, that they're overwhelmed with how much data there is in it and how revolutionary it is, that it's a completely new way of analyzing human phenomena. Now, notice I say human phenomena because human psychology is defined as the study of human behavior. And this subject is bigger than psychology because phenomena is bigger than behavior. So, for example, there's a scale of civilization which articulates how civilizations develop. And this has implications on a personal level to help you assess a situation, a group or a country, or even your own life relative to that scale. That's completely beyond anything in psychology. I'm not knocking psychology. I studied psychology. I like psychology. I understand it. But this is not psychology. It's a much bigger subject. I mentioned before that most people who read nonfiction books are in a certain slot. Theology people read theology books. And obviously, as a polymath, I'm not like that. If you study physics, you come across Sir Isaac Newton. Well, I would then want to study Sir Isaac Newton, find out, who is this guy? How did he figure this out? What kind of a person is this? Well, then you're studying English history. You're studying the history of science. So that's sort of how I experience everything. I'm sort of doing that all the time.
Yeah. So you said that you didn't get a doctorate in this subject. Would it be beneficial to instigate a university course to get a doctorate in this in Septemics?
Well, first of all, before we get to the doctorate, first of all, you would have to just get it taught in universities. And I don't think that'll happen in my lifetime, because the universities now are a closed system. They are really more interested in indoctrination. When I went to college, colleges were bastions of free thought. That is no longer true. Okay, you cannot articulate certain positions. You will be literally beaten. You will be literally driven off the campus if you hold an opinion contrary to the standard opinion. So that is the tenor of society in general now, and it's true in the university. So university people will be the last people to go into the subject, which is ironic, because they would be the people who would understand it the fastest and the easiest.
And benefit the most from it.
They would, yes. But I say in the book that this subject should be taught as a 2-semester college course. It would take 2 semesters to teach this subject. Now, as far as graduate school, well, that's in the future. I probably won't be around then.
Well, for the time being, you are around. And thank you very much. Most enlightening.
You're welcome.
I think we're going to have a look at this book.
Yeah, and I want to invite people, go to my website. My contact information is on my website.
Yeah.
And sometimes people read the book and they will say, what did you mean on paragraph 2 on page 48? And I will tell them. So I am accessible to people through the website. I have no problem about getting questions or comments or whatever from people I never met before.
Happy days. Well, Jim, that's been most enlightening, actually. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The Tim Heale Podcasts. Ordinary people's extraordinary stories.